Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Let's start our video with the story in which our OP living in Mexico learns the hard way that when it comes to certain issues, you just can't rely on the police. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with a turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. A total jerk parked on the entrance of my house and got annoyed when I called him out. Living in Mexico, I quickly learned that when it comes to certain issues, you can't rely on the police. It's frustrating, but calling them is like shouting into the void. Nothing ever comes of it. This became especially clear with my neighbor, who's decided to run a little after-hours beer business out of her house. Now, I wouldn't care if it wasn't for her customers treating my property like their personal parking lot. It all started when this guy, let's call him Kevin, since I have no idea what his actual name is, decided one day that it was totally fine to park his car inside my yard. Yep, you read that right. I hadn't put up a fence yet, so I guess he figured my property was fair game. We've got our own vehicles, and it's our house, so my mom and I decided to take matters into our own hands. She paid for a fence, and I slapped a big no parking sign right on the gate. Problem solved, right? Wrong. About a month ago, Kevin strikes again. This time he parked right in front of my house instead of next door where he belonged. My sister tried honking her motorcycle to get someone's attention, but of course no one came out. We managed to get in, but it was a whole unnecessary ordeal. I called the police, but surprise, surprise, nothing happened. Fast forward to 2 weeks ago, and I'm exhausted, coming home from work just wanting to get inside and relax. But what do I see blocking my gate? Kevin's dusty gray Lexus. My sister tries the honking trick again, but it's clear no one cares, so I start yelling, "Who's the owner of this gray Lexus? Can someone come move this car, please?" over and over again. After a few minutes, some neighbors 3 houses down who were busy drinking in their yard start shouting something back. I couldn't really make out what they were saying, but eventually one of them admits that the car owner is at the house across from mine. Finally, a young boy comes out and says he's coming to move the car. I thank him, but made it clear that Kevin shouldn't be parking there in the first place. That's when the man of the hour himself shows up, looking annoyed as if I'm the one being a nuisance. He tries to tell us we can squeeze in through a 2-inch gap on the sidewalk, asking, "What bothers you about this?" I just look him dead in the eye and say, "That's my house. That's what bothers me." My sister points out the other parking options he could have taken, plenty of space, just not in front of my gate. Kevin eventually moves his car, but the look he gives us, like we're the ones causing trouble, makes my blood boil. And just yesterday, guess what? He parked in front of my gate again. It's illegal, at least in my city, but the police don't care, and apparently neither does Kevin. So here's the update. I found out that while I couldn't get Kevin towed myself, there's a loophole. I got in touch with the local tow service and explained the situation. They couldn't tow Kevin's car directly, but they did suggest I get the city involved to enforce the parking laws. I gathered all the evidence I had, videos, photos, even the conversation I had with Kevin. Then I submitted a formal complaint to the city. After some back and forth, a city official finally came out to inspect the situation. When they saw the constant parking violations, they issued a warning to Kevin and made it clear that any future infractions would result in his car getting towed and he'd be hit with fines. And when you know it, Kevin hasn't parked in front of my gate since. It's a small victory, but one that I'm pretty proud of. Sometimes you gotta find a way around the system to get things done. If he's a criminal, might want to be extra nice and diplomatic. Not worth losing your life over it. And our second story. Neighbor is mad about my new fence. I bought this place about a year ago. It's got a nice big yard, about 1.25 acres. My neighbor, on the other hand, is about to sell his home. Now, I've had my suspicions for a while that some of the land he's been calling his yard is actually part of my property. He's an ex-city worker, always acting like he knows it all, but I had a hunch he was either wrong or just flat out lying about what he said. So I did what anyone in my situation would do. I hired a surveyor to map out the boundaries. Sure enough, the survey showed exactly what I suspected. My property line extends about 15 feet into the area he's been mowing and treating like it's his. And we're not talking about a small patch of land. It's a stretch about 250 feet long, which is a pretty significant amount. When the surveyor was out there putting in the boundary markers, I figured I'd be neighborly and texted him, inviting him to come see where the real boundaries are. But instead of a civil conversation, the guy stormed out of his house like a madman, screaming, and even got physically violent. I managed to get some great footage of him up in my face, shouting profanities and trying to put his hands on me. The surveyor was stunned, said he'd never seen anything like it. Now all I want to do is clear that area and put up a fence. It's my property after all, and those boundary markers are certified and filed with the county. But I know if I go ahead and tell the work crew to start, this guy's definitely going to call the cops on me. My biggest concern, though, is that if I don't protect my property line by putting up this fence, I could end up dealing with the claim of adverse possession. He's been mowing that strip of grass for who knows how long, acting like it's his, and if I don't do something, it could become a legal headache down the line. To make matters even more complicated, he's trying to list his house right now. All the photos in his listing include that strip of land as if it's part of the sale. I'm definitely planning to inform the listing agent about the real boundaries. My primary goal is to put up this fence and secure what's mine, but I'm also hoping this whole mess pushes him to move out. I've thought about whether I should wait until the new owners move in and then just go ahead with the fence. They might end up suing him for failing to disclose the true boundaries, but that wouldn't be my problem. All I know is I'm not backing down. This is my land, and I'm going to protect it, one way or another. Update. I made sure everything was rock solid on my end, permits, the survey, everything. I even had a chat with my lawyer to make sure I knew exactly where I stood legally. With all my ducks in a row, I gave the work crew the green light to start putting up the fence. As expected, the moment the crew showed up, my neighbor lost it. He came storming out of his house, yelling and threatening to call the police. But this time I was ready. I calmly explained to him that the boundary had been legally established and that I had every right to put up the fence on my own property. I even reminded him that any interference could have legal consequences, especially with the evidence I had of his previous outburst. Sure enough, he did call the cops, but when they arrived and saw that everything was in order, they sided with me. The fence went up without any further issues, and the neighbor realized he couldn't do a thing about it. In the end, he was forced to accept the reality of the situation. The listing agent for his house had to update the property details, making it clear that the land he thought was his wasn't part of the sale. From what I heard, it ended up affecting the sale price, and he wasn't too happy about that. But here's the best part. Shortly after the fence was up, he finally sold his house and moved out. The new owners are much more reasonable, and we've already had a friendly conversation about the fence. No issues there at all. And our last story. Karen from the HOA stole a veteran's wheelchair. Big mistake. Backstory. We live in a small house on the outskirts of town. My dad's a Marine Corps vet, served the country proudly, but after an accident, he's been in a wheelchair. He's always been tough, and even now, he doesn't let it get him down. Not far from our house, there's a community pool run by the HOA, but since there are only a few homes paying into it, the HOA decided to sell membership cards to neighbors like us who aren't in the association just to help with the upkeep. We bought one of those cards and started going regularly. For my dad, the pool's a godsend. When he's in the water, he doesn't feel his limitations and can move freely. But while the pool's been a blessing for us, for some people, specifically this lady named Karen, it became the center of non-stop drama. Day 1. Dad and I went to the pool, and as usual, he got into the water right away, enjoying the freedom. Out of nowhere, Karen stormed over, her eyes locked on his wheelchair parked by the side. "What is this? Is this a wheelchair?" she screeched loud enough for the entire pool to hear. I could see Dad tense up, but tried to keep his cool. "Yeah, it's mine," he answered, not wanting to engage too much. Karen crossed her arms and launched into her typical Karen rant. "Do you realize this could scare my kids? They see it and start asking questions. How am I supposed to explain this to them?" People around the pool were starting to stare at her, but Karen didn't seem to care. Dad could stand and even walk a little, but it's painful and tiring for him. I knew he could have just left to avoid the hassle, but this time he stood his ground. "I paid for my membership just like everyone else. I have every right to be here," he said, trying to stay calm. Karen wasn't having it. "You're not in the HOA. You shouldn't even be here." Day 2. The confrontation didn't end there. Every time Karen saw Dad at the pool, she made a scene. She kept ranting about how he was scaring her kids, that his wheelchair was unsanitary and dangerous. She even started claiming he was breaking the HOA spirit, whatever that meant. Everyone knew she was just being a pain, but Dad kept his cool. I could tell, though, it was wearing on him. Day 3, the final showdown. That day, Dad decided to go to the pool by himself. I was at work, and he didn't want to miss out on the sunny day. Everything was going fine until he got out of the pool and realized his wheelchair was gone. He looked around, thinking someone might have moved it, but then in the corner of the pool area, he spotted Karen grinning like she'd won the lottery. She was laughing. "What are you going to do now, huh? Ha! Thought you could just roll in here whenever you want. Guess again." Dad was shocked, but didn't react the way she probably expected. Instead, he painfully made his way over to the front desk, sat down in a regular chair, and called the police. The arrival of the police. The cops showed up pretty quickly, given that the pool wasn't far from the station. 2 officers came in and went straight to Dad. When they heard what had happened, their faces got serious real fast. One of them walked over to Karen, who was still standing there, looking smug. "Ma'am, did you steal this man's wheelchair?" one of the officers asked her, dead serious. Karen, thinking she was still in control, smirked and responded, "Yeah, I took it. He's been driving me nuts. So what? You gonna give me a ticket or something?" The officer didn't even flinch. He pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for theft and harassment of a veteran," he said calmly. Karen's face dropped. The smug grin disappeared in an instant, replaced by pure panic. She started shouting about how it was unfair and that she was in the HOA, as if that somehow made her untouchable. As they cuffed her, Dad, still sitting calmly in the chair, looked at her and said just a few words. "I hope your kids never grow up to be like you." That hit her harder than anything else. After that, she finally confessed where she'd stashed the wheelchair. The officers retrieved it and took Karen to the station. The aftermath. Karen didn't just lose her pool privileges, she got slapped with a fine and some legal trouble for what she did. Dad, as always, stayed above it, though I could tell it weighed on him. But in the end, justice was served, and Karen learned a harsh lesson about messing with a veteran. HOA Karen holds the mark of quality wherever they've been. I hope she regrets her actions and learns her lesson, at least for a while. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.